My boyfriend expected me to pay every bill because I was independent. Never imagined that becoming independent would somehow mean becoming everyone's personal ATM. When I first met my boyfriend, Ethan, he seemed different from every other guy I'd dated. He talked about equality. He said relationships should be partnerships, not one person carrying the other. Hearing that made me feel safe because I'd worked hard to become financially stable. I grew up watching my mom struggle after depending on the wrong people, so I promised myself I'd always have my own income. Apparently, Ethan heard, "I have my own income," and translated it into, "Perfect, I don't have to spend mine." It didn't happen overnight. That's the part that still frustrates me. If he'd asked me to pay for everything on our first date, I would have laughed and walked out. Instead, he played the long game. Our first date was sweet. We had dinner at a cozy little restaurant. When the bill came, he reached for his wallet, frowned dramatically, and said, "You've got to be kidding me." I asked what was wrong. He sighed. "I left my card in my other jacket." I smiled and paid. No big deal. He thanked me at least 10 times and transferred the money the next morning. Green flag, or so I thought. The second time, his banking app was supposedly down. The third time, his paycheck had been delayed. The fourth time, his credit card had been flagged for suspicious activity. Every excuse sounded believable on its own. Looking back, they were almost too believable. Months passed, little by little paying became my responsibility. If we grabbed coffee, I'd pay, movie tickets, me, weekend lunches, also me. He always had an explanation. Get the next one. Next one never came. I convinced myself relationships weren't supposed to be transactional. I wasn't keeping score. I cared about him. Then one evening we were sitting on my couch watching a movie when he casually said something that made me pause. "You know what I love about dating an independent woman?" I smiled. "What?" "I never have to worry about money." I laughed because I assumed he was joking. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he nodded seriously. "That's honestly one of the biggest reasons I wanted someone ambitious." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I asked, "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "You make your own money. You're not one of those girls expecting a man to provide everything." I agreed with that part. Then he added, "So it makes sense that you cover more expenses." "Wait, what?" I blinked. "Why would that make sense?" He looked genuinely confused. "Because you're independent." Remember staring at him, wondering if I had somehow missed a step in basic logic. Being independent meant I could support myself, not another adult. But he said it with so much confidence that I actually questioned myself. Maybe relationships worked differently now. Maybe I was overthinking it, so I let it go. Big mistake. After that conversation, something shifted. Whenever we went out, he didn't even pretend to reach for the bill anymore. The waiter would place it on the table. And Ethan would simply slide it toward me. No eye contact, no discussion, just cross the table. Like that was the most natural thing in the world. One night, I jokingly pushed it back. He pushed it toward me again. I laughed awkwardly. "So, are we splitting?" Looked offended. I thought we were beyond keeping score. Interesting, apparently asking to split one dinner meant I was keeping score, but expecting me to pay every single time wasn't. That became his favorite phrase. "We're partners. Don't count pennies. Money shouldn't matter." Funny how money never mattered when it was mine. A few weeks later, we planned a weekend trip to a nearby lake. Nothing fancy, just a quiet getaway. I booked the cabin because he said he was busy. Then he asked if I could reserve the rental car. Then he asked if I could grab groceries before we left. Then he forgot to send his half. Again, by the end of the trip, I'd paid for almost everything. Cabin, gas, food, activities, even parking. When I added it up later, I'd spent almost 3 times what he had. His contribution, he bought 2 bottles of water at a gas station. He actually joked. I pitched in. I laughed because I didn't want to ruin the weekend. Inside, though, something felt wrong still. He always had words ready. "Babe, you know I'd do the same for you." Would he? I honestly didn't know anymore. Then came my birthday. The one day I thought I wouldn't have to organize or pay for anything. Ethan told me not to make plans. Got everything covered. I was excited, not because I expected anything expensive. Honestly, I would have been happy with a picnic. It was the effort that mattered. The night arrived. He picked a trendy rooftop restaurant I'd been wanting to try for months. The view was incredible. The food was amazing. He kept smiling all evening. He even made a little speech about how proud he was of me for a moment. I thought maybe I'd judged him too harshly. Maybe he really had planned something special. Then the server brought the bill without even glancing at it. Ethan looked at me and smiled. "Birthday girl." I smiled back. "What about me?" He laughed. "Got this." I thought he was joking. "I'm serious." "Am I?" The smile slowly disappeared from my face. You invited me. I know. So why am I paying? He leaned back in his chair like he was explaining something obvious. Because you're financially independent. Stared at him. It's my birthday. And I shouldn't have to pay for my own birthday dinner. He actually rolled his eyes. See, this is exactly what's wrong. I frowned. What? You say you believe in equality until it's time to pay. I almost laughed from disbelief. Equality, I'd paid for nearly everything for months. Now I was somehow the unfair one. I quietly asked. When was the last time you paid for dinner? He crossed his arms. Really going to keep score. The silence between us felt heavier than the bills sitting on the table. I looked around. Other couples were laughing, celebrating. Meanwhile, I was sitting across from someone who somehow turned my birthday into a debate about my wallet. I paid, not because I agreed. Because I didn't want to argue in a crowded restaurant. The ride home was painfully quiet. I kept replaying the evening in my head. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe birthdays weren't a big deal to him. Maybe. Then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the restaurant. The reservation confirmation. I opened it out of curiosity. And that's when I noticed something strange. The reservation hadn't been made under Ethan's account. It had been made using my rewards membership. The same rewards account linked to my email, meaning he hadn't booked anything. He'd simply logged into my account, used my points for the reservation perks, and still expected me to pay the full bill. I just sat there staring at my phone. For the first time, a question hit me so hard I couldn't ignore it anymore. Was I his girlfriend? Or was I just the easiest person to finance his lifestyle? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, little moments I'd brushed aside started replaying like scenes from a movie. The expensive dinners, the coffee runs, the gas money, the movie tickets, the weekend trips. Every single time, somehow, the bill had quietly landed in front of me. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the expectation. I kept asking myself one question. If I suddenly lost my job tomorrow, would Ethan still treat me the same way, or would he lose interest because the independent woman he admired wasn't financially useful anymore? The next morning, I opened my banking app. I wasn't trying to obsess over every dollar. I just wanted to know the truth. So I went through 6 months of transactions, restaurant after restaurant, ride shares, groceries, hotel deposits, concert tickets, coffee shops, online food deliveries. The total shocked me. I had spent several times more on our relationship than he had. Meanwhile, every time Ethan talked about us with his friends, he'd proudly say things like, "We always split responsibilities." Split, I almost laughed. Apparently, splitting meant I paid while he thanked me. That weekend, we met a few of his friends for lunch. I hadn't met some of them before, so I wanted to make a good impression. Everything started normally. People joked around. We ordered food. Then one of his friends smiled at me. So, Ethan says you're the successful one. I smiled politely. I just work hard. His friend nodded. He always says you take great care of him. Something about the way he said it made me curious. What do you mean? "Oh, you know," he shrugged. "You pay for most things because you're the independent one." The whole table nodded. One girl even laughed. Honestly, that's kind of refreshing. I blinked. What is? Usually it's the guy paying. I forced a smile. Before I could answer, Ethan wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "She's not like that." Everyone laughed. Then he added something that made my stomach sink. "She's low maintenance." Table laughed again, but inside my head, that sentence sounded different, low maintenance or low cost. For him, I suddenly wondered how he described me when I wasn't around. Did everyone think this arrangement was my idea? Did they think I insisted on paying? Because that wasn't what had happened at all. When lunch ended, the server placed the bill on the table, without missing a beat. Every single person looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at me, then he smiled. "Babe," I smiled back. No, the smile disappeared from his face. "What? I paid last time." He laughed awkwardly. "No, you didn't." "I did. You always mix these things up." "Don't." Table suddenly became very quiet. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was simply telling the truth. He leaned closer and whispered through clenched teeth. "Don't do this." I whispered back. "Do what?" "Make me look cheap." I stared at him for a second. Make him look cheap. I wasn't the one refusing to pay. One of his friends awkwardly cleared his throat. "We can all just split it." I immediately agreed. Perfect. Problem solved, or at least. It should have been. The bill was divided evenly. Everyone reached for their phones, everyone except Ethan. He casually looked at me. "You can just cover mine." I actually laughed because I couldn't believe he'd said that in front of everyone. "I'm only paying for myself." His face turned bright red. The silence around the table became almost unbearable, finally, very slowly. He took out his wallet, the one that somehow never seemed to appear whenever we were alone. He had his card the entire time. He paid. Nobody said anything after that. The conversation never really recovered. As we walked to the parking lot, Ethan didn't even wait for everyone to leave. What was that? What was what? You embarrassed me. I embarrassed you. You made me pay in front of my friends. I stopped walking. Ethan, you've paid before. Exactly. So why couldn't you this time? I looked at him for several seconds. Did you hear yourself? He folded his arms. You make more money than I do. Also pay my own rent. So I pay my own utilities. So I buy my own groceries. So I took a deep breath, and somehow I'm expected to pay for yours too. He rolled his eyes. Making this dramatic. No, I wasn't making it dramatic. I was finally saying it out loud. There was a difference. The drive home was painfully quiet. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan, not with an apology, with a request. Babe, can you order us dinner? I'm exhausted. I stared at the message, then another one arrived. And can you make it that sushi place? I've been craving it. I couldn't help laughing, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable, after everything that happened. His first instinct was still to ask me to pay. Instead of ordering food, I replied with something simple. Why don't you order it tonight? 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he replied. I spent money at lunch. I read that message 3 times. He genuinely believed buying one meal somehow excused months of me paying for nearly everything else. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, my phone rang. I let it ring, then another call, and another. Finally, he left a voicemail. His voice sounded annoyed. I don't know why you're acting weird lately. Ever since you started counting money, you've changed. Counting money, that phrase stuck with me. I wasn't counting every dollar, I was noticing a pattern. And those are 2 very different things. The next morning, while getting ready for work, I received a notification from my credit card company. Normally, I ignore promotional emails. This one wasn't promotional. It was a purchase alert. A purchase I didn't recognize. It wasn't a huge amount, but it had been made through a food delivery app. Using my saved card, I froze. I hadn't ordered anything. Then I remembered something. Months earlier, Ethan had borrowed my phone to order takeout because his battery had died. Back then, I'd thought nothing of it. Now I opened the app, sure enough. My card was still saved. And someone had just used it. The delivery address wasn't mine. It was Ethan's apartment. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing this wasn't an accident. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't bad luck. Someone had knowingly placed an order, using my card, without even asking me first. And for the first time since we started dating. I wasn't wondering how to explain his behavior anymore. I was wondering just how many other things I hadn't noticed. I wish I could tell you that I immediately confronted him. I didn't. Not because I was afraid of him, because I wanted to be absolutely sure before accusing someone I cared about. So instead of calling him, I checked the order details. The receipt showed exactly what had been purchased. 2 sushi platters, dessert, 2 drinks, enough food for more than one person. That caught my attention. He told me the night before that he was staying home because he was exhausted. Apparently, staying home involved ordering an expensive meal with my card. I took screenshots of everything and closed the app. About an hour later, Ethan texted me. Morning, beautiful. Like nothing had happened, I replied casually. Morning. How's your day? So far, so good. No mention of the food, no apology, nothing. Then another message arrived. Hey, can you send me a little money? I'll pay you back Friday. I actually laughed out loud, not because it was funny, because the timing was unbelievable. I looked at the screenshots sitting in my gallery. He had already spent my money. Now he wanted more. Instead of arguing, I simply replied. I'm trying to be more careful with my spending. Several minutes passed before he answered. Since when? Since I realized I was dating someone who thought my bank account was a shared resource. Of course, I didn't type that. I just repeated, I'm budgeting. He sent a thumbs up emoji. That should have been the end of it. Instead, that evening he showed up at my apartment carrying flowers. At first, I thought maybe he wanted to apologize. He smiled, handed me the bouquet, and kissed my forehead. I missed you. Flowers were beautiful. Then I noticed something attached to the wrapping, a small receipt. Apparently, the cashier had accidentally left it tucked inside. I wasn't trying to snoop. It was sticking out. My eyes landed on the total. The flowers had been purchased less than an hour earlier, using a rewards account linked to my phone number. I frowned. Did you use my number? He shrugged. You get points faster than I do. Again, my accounts, my rewards, my benefits, everything somehow became ours. Only when it helped him. He walked into my kitchen like he lived there. What's for dinner? I haven't cooked. Oh, he opened my refrigerator. Got groceries. I bought those for the week. Can replace them later. I noticed something strange. Whenever it came to using my things, it was always we. Whenever it came to paying for something himself, suddenly it became you. While I was making tea, he sat on my couch scrolling through his phone, then he smiled. My friends are planning a beach trip next month. Sounds fun. You should come. I might. We'll need to book soon. I nodded. Then he casually added, you can reserve the Airbnb. I looked at him. Why me? Your credit card has better travel rewards. There it was again, another expense, another reason why it somehow made more sense for me to pay first. I decided to ask a simple question. Much are you planning to contribute? He looked genuinely confused. Contribute? Yes, the trip. He leaned back and sighed dramatically. I thought we were a team. I thought teams shared responsibilities. Do. Then why am I always the one paying first? He smiled the same smile he'd used dozens of times before. You always make everything about money. I answered calmly. I'm making it about fairness. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he changed the subject so quickly it almost gave me whiplash. Did you see that new phone coming out? No, looks amazing. He spent the next 10 minutes talking excitedly about all its features. Finally, I asked, are you thinking of buying it? Maybe. Isn't it expensive? Yeah, I've been saving. Saving, that word echoed in my head, saving while I was paying for dinners, saving while I covered weekend trips, saving while I bought groceries, saving because someone else was funding the everyday expenses. A strange feeling settled over me. I wasn't helping him get back on his feet. I was helping him build his savings while draining mine. A few days later, one of my coworkers invited me to lunch. We were chatting about relationships when she casually asked, so, who's paying for your anniversary dinner next week? I blinked. Anniversary? Didn't you mention it's coming up? Oh, I'd almost forgotten. Things had been so tense that it hadn't even crossed my mind. She smiled. I bet he's planning something special. I forced a smile back. I hope so. Words felt heavier than I expected. That evening, Ethan called. Guess what? What? I found the perfect restaurant for our anniversary. Really? Yeah, looks incredible. I smiled despite everything. Maybe this was his chance to surprise me. Maybe he'd finally realized how one-sided things had become. Then he added, they require a deposit. My smile faded. And, can you book it tonight? I closed my eyes. Ethan. What? Whose anniversary is this? Ours. So why am I paying the deposit? It's easier if you do it. Easier for who? He hesitated. Us, there it was again. Us, a tiny word that somehow always meant me. I didn't argue. Instead, I said something he'd probably never expected to hear. Not booking it. Silence. I'll book it if you send me your half first. Silence stretched even longer. Finally, he laughed. You can't be serious. I am. So you're testing me now? No. I'm asking for the same partnership you've always claimed we had. His tone immediately changed. I can't believe money matters this much to you, quietly replied. It never did. It started mattering when I realized it only seemed to matter when it was mine. He didn't answer. A few seconds later, the call disconnected. For the rest of the evening, my phone stayed completely silent. No messages, no apology, nothing. And that silence told me something I hadn't wanted to admit. The moment I stopped acting like his safety net, he stopped acting like the perfect boyfriend. I had a feeling our anniversary wasn't going to reveal how much he loved me. It was going to reveal exactly what he expected from me, and this time, I had no intention of reaching for the bill first for the next 3 days. Nothing, no good morning. No random memes, no calls asking about my day. It was strangely quiet. At first, I felt guilty. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I should have just booked the restaurant and moved on. Then I stopped myself. Why was I the only one questioning my behavior? Why wasn't he wondering if he'd been unfair on the evening before our anniversary? My phone finally buzzed. It was Ethan. I booked the restaurant. I blinked. He actually booked it himself. I smiled. Maybe he had finally understood. Then another message came through. I used my card. That wording felt odd, almost like he expected applause. I replied, okay, thanks. A minute later, another text. So you'll cover dinner, right? I stared at the screen. I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. I typed, deleted the message, typed again, then settled on something simple. No, we can each pay for our own meals or one of us can treat the other. You chose the restaurant, so that's your decision. His reply came almost instantly. Wow, just one word. Wow, as if I'd suggested something outrageous. The next evening, I got dressed and headed to the restaurant. When I arrived, Ethan was already waiting. He greeted me with a hug and a smile so warm that, For a second, I wondered if we'd finally moved past everything. Dinner started pleasantly. We talked about work. We laughed about a movie we'd watched months earlier. For the first time in weeks, things felt almost normal. Then dessert arrived right behind it. The bill. The server politely placed the check between us. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Ethan looked at me. So, what? You can take care of it. I smiled politely. No, his smile faded. I already paid the reservation deposit. I appreciate that. This balances out. I gently shook my head. No, it doesn't. He leaned closer. Start this again. I'm not starting anything. I'm ending a pattern. His expression hardened. Changed? I have. You used to be generous. Still am. I'm just no longer willing to be taken for granted. For a few seconds, he simply stared at me, then he laughed, not a happy laugh, a frustrated one. You know what your problem is? I stayed quiet. Become selfish. That word hit me harder than I expected. Selfish. I'd spent months paying for dinners, trips, groceries, and countless little expenses. The first time I asked for fairness, I became selfish. I calmly asked, "Can I ask you something?" "What? If I stopped paying for anything tomorrow, would you still want this relationship?" He answered so quickly that it almost sounded rehearsed. "Of course." "Then prove it." He frowned. "How?" "Pay for dinner." Silence. He looked at the bill, then at me, then back at the bill. Almost a full minute passed. Finally, he sighed dramatically, reached into his wallet, and paid. He didn't say another word. The drive home was painfully quiet. When we reached my apartment, I thanked him for dinner and got out of the car. Before I could close the door, he spoke. "I hope you're happy." Looked back. "What do you mean?" "You made me spend almost my whole entertainment budget tonight." I nodded slowly. "And how do you think I felt every week?" He didn't answer. I closed the door. The next morning, I woke up to a message from one of his friends. We weren't particularly close, so it surprised me. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure. You and Ethan okay?" "I think so." "Why?" There was a long pause before the reply came. "He told everyone you've become obsessed with money." I wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Instead of defending myself immediately, I asked, "What exactly did he say?" Another pause, then the friend replied, "He said you make him pay for everything now because you've become greedy." Greedy. I couldn't help laughing. If I hadn't lived through the last several months myself, I might have believed that version too. I thanked his friend for being honest and ended the conversation. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. The moment I answered, he sounded irritated. "Why are you talking to my friends? They contacted me. They're getting the wrong idea." I took a deep breath. "What idea?" "That I'm using you." I stayed silent because for the first time, he had accidentally said the exact issue out loud. He quickly corrected himself. "I mean, that's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "We just have different views on money." "Have different views on responsibility." He sighed loudly. I knew dating an independent woman would eventually become complicated. That sentence stopped me cold. I quietly asked, "What does being independent mean to you?" He answered without hesitation. "It means you don't need someone to take care of you." "Agree." He sounded relieved. "Exactly." Continued, "But it doesn't mean I have to take care of another adult." Silence, complete silence for the first time since we'd started dating. He didn't have a clever response. He couldn't twist my words. He couldn't call me selfish. He couldn't hide behind the word equality. Because real equality was never about one person paying while the other benefited. A few days later, I was cleaning my apartment when I found an old notebook I'd used to track monthly expenses. Out of curiosity, I compared my spending before and after I started dating Ethan. The difference was impossible to ignore. My savings had slowed down dramatically. Meanwhile, I remembered something he'd proudly told me just a few weeks earlier. Saved enough for a brand new phone. At the time, I'd congratulated him. Now I realized something painful. Part of the reason he'd been able to save was because I had unknowingly been covering so many everyday costs. His financial progress had quietly become my financial sacrifice. I closed the notebook and sat there in silence. The numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were proof. And once you've seen proof, it's almost impossible to go back to pretending everything is normal. I had a feeling the hardest conversation of our relationship was still ahead of us. But this time, I wasn't afraid of the answer, because deep down I already knew it. A week later, I asked Ethan if we could meet somewhere quiet, not at my apartment, not at his. I didn't want either of us to feel trapped in someone else's space. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods, ironically. It was one of the first places we'd ever gone together. As I walked in, I noticed he'd already ordered himself a drink. For a split second, I wondered if he'd finally decided to pay for something without making it a discussion. Then he smiled. I already ordered yours too. Thanks. When the server brought my coffee, she also placed the receipt on the table. Without even looking at it, Ethan slid it toward me. I looked down at the bill, then back at him. He didn't even realize what he'd done. It had become a habit, an automatic reflex, almost like breathing. I gently pushed the receipt back across the table. Pay for my own, he sighed. Seriously? Yes. You've made everything so awkward. Made it clear. He reluctantly paid and immediately looked annoyed, as though he'd been forced into something unreasonable. That tiny moment told me more than any argument ever had. This wasn't an occasional misunderstanding. It was an expectation. After we finished our drinks, I finally said what I'd come to say. Been thinking a lot. So have I. I don't think this relationship feels balanced anymore. He frowned. So you're breaking up with me over money? I shook my head. Breaking up because of how you've treated me. That's the same thing. If this were about money, I would have left months ago. He folded his arms. Then what is it? It's about respect. He stayed quiet. Asked myself over and over whether I was imagining things. I wasn't. Kept giving because I loved you. Somewhere along the way, you stopped appreciating it. You started expecting it. He looked away. Never forced you. You're right. Didn't. I chose to help. Every time I tried to stop, you called me selfish. You questioned whether I believed in equality. You made me feel guilty. His jaw tightened. I was just joking half the time. I laughed half the time. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversations around us, but our table felt strangely isolated. Finally, Ethan leaned forward. So what now? I think we should end this. He blinked. Serious? I am. He stared at me for several long seconds before speaking again. I can change. I wanted to believe him, part of me really did. But another part remembered every conversation we'd already had, every chance, every excuse. Every promise that somehow led back to the same place. I answered honestly. I hope you do. I don't want to stay just to find out if you will. His shoulders dropped. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I looked at him sadly. That's exactly the problem. A relationship shouldn't have to reach this point before one person realizes something is wrong, he quietly asked. So, that's it? I nodded. I think so. There wasn't any yelling, no dramatic scene, no insults. Just two people sitting across from each other, realizing they wanted very different kinds of partnerships. I stood up, wished him well, and walked out. For the first few days after the breakup, I kept reaching for my phone out of habit. Then I'd remember. There were moments when I missed him, or maybe I missed the version of him I kept hoping he'd become. A month later, my savings account looked healthier than it had in a long time, not because I suddenly earned more. Because I had stopped quietly paying for two people's lives. One Saturday, I treated myself to lunch at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try. I ordered exactly what I wanted, dessert too, when the bill arrived. I smiled. I paid without hesitation. Not because someone expected me to, because it was my choice. And somehow, that felt completely different. As I was leaving, I heard someone call my name. I turned around. It was one of Ethan's friends from that awkward lunch weeks earlier. He smiled nervously. I heard you two broke up. He hesitated before saying, I just wanted to tell you something. What is it? I don't think anyone realized how much you were paying. I stayed quiet. He continued. After you left, Ethan started asking everyone else to cover little things. Coffees, parking, takeout. First we thought it was temporary. Then we realized. That was just how he'd gotten used to living. I didn't feel satisfied hearing that. I didn't feel like I'd won, mostly. I felt relieved. Relieved that I'd trusted my instincts instead of convincing myself that fairness was something I needed to apologize for. On my walk home, I thought about something Ethan used to say all the time. I love independent women. Back then, I thought it was a compliment. Now I understood something important. Someone who truly values your independence won't see it as permission to rely on your wallet. They'll respect your time, your effort, your generosity. And they'll make sure you're never carrying the relationship alone. That experience taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Being generous is a beautiful quality. But generosity without boundaries eventually becomes something people expect instead of appreciate. And once appreciation disappears, love usually isn't far behind. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. Never confuse equality with one-sided sacrifice. A healthy relationship isn't built on keeping score. But it also isn't built on one person quietly paying every bill while being told that's simply the price of being independent. Right person won't admire your independence because it saves them money. They'll admire it because it's part of who you are. and they'll still be more than willing to meet you halfway.